All right, let's see. Hopefully the screen share is working. We'll get started here. First question is going to be from a lot of you. You're in this class for maybe it's fulfilling a requirement, or maybe you're not sure why, or what is, it just happened to fit your schedule, or it's a lot of credits. And, the first question I always pose is, or maybe on your mind is, what is anthropology? What is this anthropology thing anyway? It's probably the least well-known academic discipline. So this is something that a lot of people don't know what it is before they study. The word anthropology comes from two words. That ology part at the end is the science or the study of something. So you might know that from sociology or biology. And then the anthro part of it means people or persons or humans. Probably in the old days we would have said man, the study of man, but the study of humans, the study of humanity. So this is what Muckle and González, those are our textbook authors. So Bob Muckle is an archaeologist. Laura González is a cultural anthropologist. And this is the second edition of their Through the Lens of Anthropology textbook. They call anthropology the study of humans. So this is kind of, and then on your screen there you can see what a full citation in text of the textbook would look like. He put the author's last name in parentheses there, Muckle and González, the year, a comma, and then a page number. And that's why I like to use the PDFs of these things, because at least then you can see what page number it is, and then we can all be on the same page. So that would be a sort of full informal cite of the text, and you can use that in your essays or things like that. But I would say that oftentimes for PowerPoint purposes and in your papers and on your discussion posts, you can abbreviate that. I abbreviate Muckle and González as M&G and just give a page number there. Or if it's obvious you're talking about something that's in the textbook, you really only need the page number. That's really the most important thing to do. So the study of humans, and Muckle and González describe it as a framework, a way of understanding how humans came and continue to be. And there are various frameworks that we use in our academic study, and anthropology is one of the frameworks. It is certainly not the only framework, as you know from studying economics or psychology or sociology or political science. Those are other frameworks for understanding the world and understanding our place in the world and what various functions we have as humans in it. Anthropology is a funny discipline in the sense that it's something that it causes us to, by studying others, we also are in some ways studying our own selves and our own assumptions. So later on in the course, at the very end, probably when we all go home for Thanksgiving and do this online, we're going to read this interesting little book by Tim Ingold called Anthropology, Why It Matters. And I just want to preview here a quote from Ingold that you'll read later on, but it should sort of help us to guide what we'll be doing in this class. So Ingold writes that anthropology doesn't tell you what you want to know. It unsettles the foundations of what you knew already. And so in some ways, a lot of what we do in anthropology is take terms that you may be familiar with or may think you know what they're talking about, and we're going to sort of interrogate them or hold them up to question. One of the interesting examples of this from the very beginning is the term humans. So we've said that anthropology is the study of humans, but as soon as you start reading into Muckle and González on page 6, you find out that there are a number of different ideas about where we start calling creatures humans, or at what time period, or who is included in the human family. So Muckle and González say that some anthropologists would go way back, and we're going to be talking about this when we talk more about biological anthropology and evolution, but some anthropologists would go way back into the family Homininae about 7 million years ago, and would say any creature that is bipedal, that's about when we have the divergence between the primates who stick the trees, or stick to not walking on 2 feet and transition to being habitually bipedal, they would say that any primate that is bipedal should also be part of the human family. Other anthropologists would say, well, that's a pretty broad, maybe a little too big. Let's stick with what we would call the genus Homo at about 2 million years ago, when you see creatures that are much more sort of biologically recognizable, you might say. They're much more in the framework of what we might consider a modern human being. So, you know, not modern at all, but very, but still, you know, a lot more, we might say, a lot more familiar to us. And so they would say, well, let's call humans back there with the genus Homo. And then there are some anthropologists who would be perhaps more restrictive in their terms of humans and would say, well, we should actually apply humans to what we call Homo sapiens, which emerged in Africa about 300,000 years ago. And that would be our species. And so we would say that humans are any creature that falls into the species of Homo sapiens. It doesn't have to be, but it wouldn't be as large as the genus or the family. It wouldn't go as far back as some other anthropologists would do. So again, just the very definition of what we would consider to be a human being is in some ways up for grabs in anthropology. I will say that there are some definitions of human which anthropology definitely rejects. And these are what I consider arrogant definitions of humans, which tend to exclude other people that really are part of our larger human family. So I think we can agree as anthropologists that humans go beyond the idea of just being modern humans, or those that are sometimes called that emerged about 30,000 years ago, and we see in different parts of Europe and Asia and Africa, but that, you know, the idea would be that, oh, other Homo sapiens don't fall into the human category. So we definitely reject, or we have a wider definition of humans than simply modern humans, which we see at about 30 to 40,000 years ago. We also reject the arrogance of the idea that only humans who use agriculture, only humans who farm should be considered humans. So some people believe that the people who are hunters and gatherers are some sort of wild man or savages, or wouldn't be considered part of the humans. And anthropology rejects this. We also reject the idea that only us today, only our group, or only our particular group of people should be considered humans, and all other humans are somehow inadequate or not quite human enough. So these are three things that anthropology rejects as being not large enough, or not wide enough, or not inclusive enough, that humanity goes beyond these kind of narrow definitions. Another crucial part of anthropology that we will learn a lot more about later as we get to sort of the middle of the course, chapter 8, we'll be talking much more in depth about the idea or the concept of culture. And anthropology, we will be studying the biological and physical aspects of human beings. But when it comes to understanding human difference, anthropology insists that we can see culture as the reason why people are different from each other. Culture being learned behavior, things that we learn how to do and can learn to do differently. So as Muckle and González put it, culture are the things people think, the things people do, and the things people have. And so they use a pretty sort of, I guess I would say it's a basic but very all-inclusive definition of culture. Things people, what we think about, what we do, our behavior, but also our material culture. And of course, that's what archaeology studies, the things people have, or what we make, or how we organize ourselves in terms of our culture. Crucial is that we learn how to do these things. We are not born We are born, of course, with instincts, but those instincts must be shaped by our membership in a social group, our training by our peers and by our parents. We learn these things in the broadest sense of the word. Most of this learning takes place way outside of any school or formal context. It's just something you grow up with, but it is something that you could have done differently had you grown up in a different society. I want to stress from the beginning, as Muckle and González put it, that culture is dynamic, fluid, and ever-changing. And I say this from the beginning because a lot of times, sometimes people will take culture and say, oh, well, that's why people are the way they are. And then they sort of lock people into these cultural boxes, you know. That's why people from Mexico have a certain way of eating or talking, is because of their culture and they can't change. And I want to insist that culture is always changing. It's ever changing. It's dynamic and it's fluid and it's in interaction with other people and other groups. So this is a key part of culture. Again, we'll be talking about these things later on in sort of the middle of the course. Going back to what we talked about when humans happen, the linked question to this is, well, when do humans become cultural humans? That is to say, when does learned behavior become crucial to the development of humanity? And so I put here back to go back to our different definitions of what we might consider human. Does it go back 7 million years ago to the bipedalism, to the Homo genus, or to 300,000 years ago with Homo sapiens? And so, for example, walking or bipedalism. We are not born walking. We actually have to learn how to walk. Certainly, biologically, if we are able to walk, if we, you know, you know, in our society we are able to walk, humans will learn how to walk, but they learn how to walk in a particular way, both individually and culturally. And so some anthropologists have speculated that perhaps this is what we might call the beginning of culture. Now, this is a little bit controversial. I think a lot of other anthropologists would say, no, that's a very biological thing. It's not necessarily what we would fit into the definition of culture as learned behavior. But I just want to kind of throw that out there, that in some ways, human beings, unlike other bipedal creatures, have to learn how to walk, and we learn how to walk in a specific way. I think that almost all anthropologists would agree that at around 2 to 3 million years ago, we have a peculiar expansion in our dependence upon culture. And we can see that, as we'll talk about in archaeology and the material record, where we see evidence of stone tool use coming in perhaps as early as 3 million years ago, but definitely by 2 million years ago. And it's also very probable that creatures before that were using tools made of materials that would have disintegrated, so wood or other natural fibers and things like that. But at 3 million, or as we'll find out more definitely at least by 2 million years ago, there is stone tool use. And so we have this co-evolution of culture as learned behavior coming in to supplement what we might consider our biological capacities. And then certainly by the time that Homo sapiens appear about 300,000 years ago, you have all kinds of things that we would consider to be cultural. You have lots of evidence of language and art and you know, different kinds of hunting and gathering techniques and evidence of burials and religious beliefs. So, you know, probably most all the things that we consider to be part of culture is definitely apparent by the time of Homo sapiens. Like we talked about that anthropologists reject arrogant definitions of the human, we also reject arrogant definitions of culture. And so, as we were saying, we we may want to broaden our horizons a little bit in what we would consider to be the idea of culture. Some people would like to restrict the idea of culture to certain people or certain groups, but anthropology takes a very wide definition of what we constitute as culture. So, for example, when people think about the cave art and the other forms of art that was introduced into Europe, I would emphasize that way before this, people were making art and rock art all over the world. So it isn't just those modern humans and the cave art that is sometimes celebrated from Europe. And interestingly, we found out that some of that cave art was probably made by the Neanderthals anyway. So it's not necessarily just modern humans who were doing the art. So culture goes back long before and and more broadly than simply the modern humans. Similarly, a lot of people wanted to believe that agriculture or farming was the root of culture. And you can see that in the very word agriculture. The idea was, well, before agriculture, there wasn't culture. They were sort of in the woods and they were hunting, or they were savages, or, primitive man. But in fact, culture comes long before the idea of farming or agriculture. And certainly, as we were talking about before, we do not want to limit culture to just the people in our time period or the people in our group. Anthropologists insist that everyone has culture. And in fact, culture is the way that we become human. We cannot become human without becoming human in a particular way. A little bit later in the textbook, Muckle and González talk about different kinds of anthropological approaches. This is part of the framework of anthropology. So these are sort of general kind of characteristics of anthropology that characterize the anthropological framework or approach. And this is, again, part of the what is anthropology question. So anthropology tends to focus on the whole human being, the linkages between various spheres of human life. So I mentioned the disciplines of economics or political science or religious studies, which would kind of study one aspect of human life. Anthropology tries to figure out how those things are connected and linked together. Why it is that the holidays, the religious holidays are also a huge economic time as well. So these things are not, can't necessarily be separated from each other, but you have to consider people together in these ways. Anthropologists are, we talk about evolution, which is simply change over time. And this we will talk about in terms of biological evolution, but we can also talk about social or cultural evolution. And that doesn't mean that, there's some sort of everything is getting better. A lot of people equate evolution with some sort of idea of progress. It simply means things are changing over time. Things are inevitably dynamic and changing. And part of my job is going to be to convince you that there are always evolutionary trade-offs. Whenever you are going in one direction, you are always sacrificing another direction that could have been. So there's pluses and minuses to every evolutionary change. Anthropology is comparative in the sense that we take, since we try to study all of humanity, we are comparing groups across the world, both in our own society and other societies, so across space, but we're also comparing people across time. We might consider historical, but anthropology, as you may know now, goes pretty deep back into time, deeper than most historians or others would go. So we're trying to compare different types of people in terms of their cultures through space and through time. Anthropology tends to be qualitative. There are certainly anthropologists who do statistics and numbers and do quantitative analysis, But a lot of anthropology has to do with understanding what people are trying to make meaning of their lives. How are they interpreting their lives? And you really can't do that without talking to people, without being with people, without trying to describe the artifacts that you're working. So it tends to be, in some ways, about telling stories and telling stories about people, or stories that analyzing the stories that people tell each other. And that makes it often much more qualitative or narrative driven than quantitative. Also, anthropology in all of its aspects needs to be based in empirical field work. It can't just be done from a classroom or a library. People need to be out either immersed in another society or in their own society, talking to people, listening to what they're saying, or in some ways, the research of archaeologists or biological anthropologists is based on being outside in the field, getting qualitative and quantitative data from artifacts and other material evidence that they have. Muckle and González describe anthropology in North America as a 4 fields discipline. And Bob Muckle is an archaeologist, your textbook author. He actually works in Canada. And Canada, like US anthropology, has this, what we consider to be a 4 fields approach. It's a little bit different in some other countries. In European countries, anthropology doesn't necessarily include some of the things that it does in North America. But this is the way anthropology has developed here. And in your discussion question, I asked you, which one of these would be your favorite, which one are you most excited to study, you might say. And I was happy to see that some people like the biological anthropology part of things. So that's one of the things we'll be talking about first in this class. This also includes evolutionary anthropology and primatology, or the study of non-human primates. If you're interested in biological anthropology, I'd encourage you to, after this course or during this course, take something with Professor Connie Anderson. So at Hartwick, she's our biological anthropologist. She does a great course in forensic osteology, medical anthropology, and courses in human evolution and primatology. She also has a 200-level biological anthropology course, which is usually offered in the spring. Archaeology is also something that people associate pretty often with anthropology. It's sometimes our most famous subfield, but archaeology is the the study of material culture or material remains in many cases, what we learn from the past, but it can also be done in the present. And here at Hartwick, we have Professor Namita Sugandhi, who teaches these fundamentals of archaeology. That's a 200-level course you can get into. And she also has been running, we run a field school every other year out at the Pine Lake Environmental Campus. Hopefully we'll be able to do that again soon. So if you're interested in archaeology, that's something that'll be the second thing that we sort of study in this class, and that's something you can take more of later on. A third field in anthropology is what is called cultural anthropology, sometimes called social anthropology, especially in the UK, or sociocultural anthropology for people who want to kind of combine that together. But it's in general considered to be the study of contemporary peoples. So I would consider myself to be a sociocultural anthropologist. I studied in Ecuador and in Colombia as my fieldwork. Basically what often happens in sociocultural anthropology is you will go to another place for about a year and observe and participate with other people, and then write up your work as what's called an ethnography, or a study of other people. This can also be done in your own society, but that would be the aim of sociocultural anthropology. We also here at Hartwick have Professor Mike Woost, who is a sociocultural anthropologist. He studies in South Asia, And so he has a great class on the peoples and cultures of South Asia. Also does an ethnographic methods course, which is an advanced kind of research methods of social or cultural anthropology, which I really recommend. The fourth branch of anthropology, which is kind of, at least for me, linked up together with the cultural side, and that's the way we'll study it in this course, is linguistic anthropology. We don't actually have someone who's completely trained solely in linguistic anthropology at Hartwick. It's a little bit of this, it's actually one of the smaller subfields of anthropology, but it concentrates on language and the role of language in human life. So these are the four fields of North American anthropology. Our course will basically be going through, starting with biological anthropology, then into archaeology, then we'll do some cultural and linguistic anthropology in the second half of the course, basically. Muckle and González have this great little diagram that sort of puts it all together. You see your four fields there, and they're all kind of surrounded by the idea of having applied anthropology. So it's not simply an academic discipline. It also has to do with, you know, what would you be able to do with it? In terms of applying anthropology, Muckle and González have two key themes that are going to be running throughout the textbook. So while we're studying biological anthropology, evolution, archaeology, culture, we're going to be looking at that through two different things that kind of cut across those ideas. So one of them is food. So how people get food, and, you know, how that has changed over time, and what we might, how food might be changing into the future. And the second main theme is sustainability. So, you know, how will we be able to maintain human life? How have humans been sustainable through their current trajectory, and are we going to be sustainable into the future? So those are the two themes that Muckle and González use to unite their textbook, and you can just be kind of on the lookout for those. They happen in those little boxes in the text as we go along, but they also happen in the text as well. So that will be something that you can use to cut across our knowledge as we go through the course. All right, actually I'm gonna pause there for a second. That's the Muckle and González point of the class. I wanted to pause there and check if there's any questions before we go on a little bit into sort of aspects of humans today, and how we know a human when we see one. So let's just pause there for a second. I'll see if there's any questions. If you want to pop in and unmute your mic or type something into the chat, let me know.